My wife Jenny and I have been together for over a decade, married for 2. Her father, Frank, has despised me from day one, viewing me as a spoiled brat because I came from a wealthy family. Despite my success as a veterinarian and our happy life in Charleston, South Carolina, his disdain never wavered. After a particularly nasty confrontation 2 years ago, I went no contact with him. Now, Jenny is pregnant. Hoping to mend fences for the sake of our growing family, she secretly invited Frank to a lunch where we planned to announce the pregnancy to my parents. What followed was a disastrous explosion of narcissistic rage, verbal abuse, and threats that forced us to make a life-altering decision. This isn't just about a difficult father-in-law. It's a story about surviving familial narcissism, the insidious effects of emotional abuse, and the crucial importance of boundary formation to protect your peace and your family. Witness the fallout as Frank's toxic behavior escalates, pushing Jenny to her breaking point and leading us down a path involving lawyers, restraining orders, and a desperate fight to shield our unborn child from his destructive influence. If you've ever dealt with a toxic family member or struggled to protect your relationship from outside interference, this story will hit close to home. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks a bunch! The salty air of Charleston, South Carolina, usually filled me with a sense of calm, a reminder of the beautiful life my wife Jenny and I had built together. We're both 25 high school sweethearts who met when our family moved here from up north. We got together at 15, weathered college, she at College of Charleston, me at Clemson for my DVM, and tied the knot 2 blissful years ago. 10 years, a decade of shared laughter, dreams, and navigating life's hurdles hand in hand. But there was always one shadow looming over our happiness: Frank, Jenny's father. Jenny's mom passed away from cancer about 3 years after they moved to Charleston, leaving Jenny with only Frank. And Frank had never liked me, not from day one. To him I was and always would be a spoiled brat. Why? Because my father is a successful architect, and I grew up in a comfortable, affluent home in the south of Broad neighborhood. He conveniently ignored the fact that I'd worked my tail off to become a veterinarian, that I earned a good living, and that Jenny and I lived a life we'd built together, not one handed to me on a silver platter. My family's wealth was a fact, not a personality trait I flaunted. But in Frank's eyes it was an unforgivable stain, proof that I wasn't good enough for his daughter, that I hadn't worked a day in my life. His judgmental attitude and class prejudice were a constant, grating irritant. Jenny, bless her loyal heart, always defended me. After she graduated, she made it crystal clear to Frank that she was marrying me. His approval be damned. He'd nagged her relentlessly to find someone better, someone from a similar background, meaning not mine. But Jenny put her foot down. Frank, fearing he'd lose his only daughter entirely, begrudgingly accepted me, though his acceptance felt more like a ceasefire than a genuine truce. I'd hoped naively that after our wedding, Frank might warm up, or at least feign civility for Jenny's sake. Instead, things got worse. Every visit to his small house in West Ashley was an exercise in biting my tongue. He'd taunt me with thinly veiled insults, mock my profession, playing with puppies all day, and generally humiliate me in front of Jenny. She'd try to intervene, but he'd just tell her, "I already let you marry him. What more do you want?" His emotional abuse was relentless, subtle enough to make me question if I was overreacting, yet pointed enough to leave me seething. After about a year of this, I finally snapped. We had a vicious verbal spat, a culmination of months of suppressed anger, and that was it. I went no contact with Frank. I told Jenny I couldn't and wouldn't subject myself to his toxicity anymore. I loved her too much to let her father destroy my peace of mind. I didn't stop Jenny from seeing him, of course. He was her dad, her only remaining parent in the state. She loved him, despite his flaws. She tried a few times to broker a reconciliation, but I wasn't willing. If, after all these years, he couldn't see past his own prejudices, then he never would. The boundary was drawn, firm and clear. For almost 2 years this arrangement worked. Frank and I hadn't spoken. I was fine with it. Then, about 2 weeks ago, our world shifted in the most wonderful way. Jenny found out she was pregnant. We were ecstatic. It wasn't planned, not this early, but the timing felt right. We were ready to embrace this new adventure, to go with the flow. I wanted to call my parents, who adored Jenny, that very moment. But Jenny, ever thoughtful, wanted to make it special. She suggested inviting them over for lunch the following Sunday when none of us had work to break the news. I readily agreed. For a week I buzzed with anticipation, imagining their joyous reactions. Sunday arrived. My parents, bless their punctual hearts, arrived right on time, around noon. But as I started to bring out the appetizers, Jenny stopped me. "Let's wait a little longer for lunch, okay?" she said, her voice a little too bright, her eyes darting towards the front door. I was confused. We hadn't discussed inviting anyone else. She kept glancing at the door, fidgeting, looking squirrely. Then, half an hour later, the doorbell rang. Jenny practically flew to open it, and there he stood, Frank. My stomach plummeted. I was stunned, speechless. My parents looked equally blindsided. Frank didn't look thrilled either, a scowl etched on his face, but he managed to gruff hello to my parents, and even grunted a syllable in my direction, which for him was practically a sonnet of politeness. The unspoken agreement Jenny and I had, that Frank wasn't welcome in our home after his last tirade, had been shattered. Once everyone was awkwardly settled in the living room, Jenny busy in the kitchen, ostensibly setting the table, but I suspected she was avoiding my gaze. I pulled her aside. "Jenny, what is he doing here?" I hissed, trying to keep my voice low. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes pleaded with me. "If I'd asked, you would have said no instantly. I had to do it this way, behind your back." "Of course, I would have said no," I retorted, stung by her deception, "and anyone in my place would have. We don't lie to each other, Jen. We don't keep secrets. This is a huge blow." My trust in her, so absolute until this moment, felt deeply shaken. She explained, her voice trembling, that she desperately wanted her only living parent to be part of this momentous occasion. Now that she was going to be a mother herself, she wanted our child to have a happy, complete family. She told Frank she wanted him to apologize to me, to make amends, and, to her surprise, he'd agreed. She wanted me to make an effort too, to fix our fractured relationship for the sake of the baby. He'd agreed to apologize? That was a shock. If Frank was genuinely willing to make an effort, then perhaps, just perhaps, I could too. For Jenny, for our baby. I took a deep breath and went back to the living room, where my parents were valiantly trying to make stilted conversation with a monosyllabic Frank. I tried to be nice, to engage him, but his demeanor hadn't changed. He was still a block of granite, emanating disapproval. But I held on to Jenny's words, hoping the apology would come later after lunch, when the atmosphere was lighter. Lunch was tense. Jenny had carefully included all my favorite dishes: shrimp and grits, fried green tomatoes, pecan pie. A sweet, thoughtful gesture that I appreciated. I tried again to talk to Frank, asking about his fishing, his garden. He just grunted or offered single-word replies, his eyes fixed on his plate. Halfway through the meal, I knew this attempt at bonding was a catastrophic failure. I could see Jenny's crestfallen face, her dawning realization that her father was, yet again, making things incredibly difficult and awkward. The emotional labor of managing Frank was exhausting, and Jenny was bearing the brunt of it. We finished lunch in a strained silence. We were just about to reveal the pregnancy, hoping the happy news would cut through the oppressive tension, when Frank suddenly stood up. "I have an announcement to make," he declared, his voice booming in the quiet room. Jenny looked as confused as I felt. I knew, with a sinking certainty, that she had no idea what he was about to say. If she had, she would never have invited him. Frank launched into a self-righteous monologue. Yes, Jenny had asked him to come for lunch, to rebuild their relationship from scratch so she could have a happy family once more. And he'd agreed, because he loved his daughter. So far, so good. But then his tone shifted, becoming accusatory, venomous. "Even though I love my daughter," he spat, his eyes fixing on me, "I cannot, in good conscience, accept her marrying into a family like yours." He gestured vaguely at my parents, then back to me. "A family where she's forced to slave away in the kitchen, to work a full-time job, while he jabbed a finger in my direction, is treated like a king, doing absolutely nothing." The projection was astounding. He was describing a dynamic that didn't exist in our home, but perhaps existed in his own outdated misogynistic worldview. He continued, his voice rising, "I knew you'd grow up to be a spoiled brat, and I was right. You're forcing my Jenny to do all the work, just like your father probably made your mother do. And for the record, my mom, a former high school math teacher, chose to be a stay-at-home mom because she wanted to spend more time with me. My dad never made her do anything. They had a partnership based on mutual respect, something Frank clearly knew nothing about. I didn't raise my daughter to be somebody's housemaid. Frank roared. Jenny, you are to divorce this parasite and move back home with me, immediately. I was furious, about to leap to my feet, but before I could utter a word, Jenny snapped. And it was a sight to behold. My usually even-tempered, gentle wife erupted like a volcano. She screamed at Frank, accusing him of lying to her, of pretending he was willing to apologize just so he could ambush us, insult me and my parents, in our own home. We've done nothing but be nice to you, Dad, she cried, tears streaming down her face. And this is how you repay us? By trying to destroy my marriage, my happiness? Everyone was shocked. Jenny rarely even raised her voice, let alone screamed. Frank, momentarily stunned by her ferocity, quickly recovered and started screaming back, accusing her of degrading herself by working for me, insisting the only reason he'd come was to take her back. His narcissistic rage was terrifying to witness. He was losing control, and he didn't care who got hurt. This went on for what felt like an eternity. Jenny was sobbing, trying to argue through her tears. Frank was relentless, his face contorted with fury. I was terrified for Jenny's health. She was 4 weeks pregnant, and this level of stress couldn't be good for her or the baby. My dad finally had to step in, his voice firm, telling Frank he needed to leave now, or he would call the police. Frank, incredibly, had the audacity to turn on my father, threatening him. You call the cops, old man, and see what happens. That was it for me. I was scared for Jenny, but I was also incandescent with rage. This man was threatening my family, in my home. I somehow managed to guide a hysterical Jenny into another room, then confronted Frank. You need to leave, I said, my voice dangerously low. Now, or we will call the police, and trust me, that won't end well for you. He finally seemed to realize he'd gone too far, but even as he backed towards the door, he kept spewing venom. I'm coming back for my daughter, he snarled. You haven't heard the last of this. You won't get away with making her work so hard. He cursed us all out before finally, blessedly, leaving. My parents left shortly after, deeply concerned. My dad's blood pressure was already an issue, and this had clearly aggravated it. They made sure Jenny and I were okay, told us to take care, and went home to relax. Jenny was inconsolable. She cried herself to sleep, and I sat beside her, stroking her hair, feeling a mixture of rage, helplessness, and a profound protective love for her and our unborn child. She woke up at 7 a.m. the next day, quiet, withdrawn, the shadows of the previous day's trauma still clinging to her. She seemed a million miles away. I desperately wanted to talk to her about Frank, to tell her that after yesterday, I didn't think it was safe or healthy for her, or the baby, for her to have any contact with him. I was even considering a restraining order. But the wound was still so raw. Was this the right time to bring it up? I was terrified of upsetting her further, but the thought of Frank continuing to inflict his toxicity on our lives, especially now with a baby on the way, was unbearable. I needed to protect my family. I needed Frank out of our lives for good. The question was, how to convince Jenny, his grieving pregnant daughter, that this was the only way. Our next step, I knew, had to be fast, and it had to be decisive. The following days were spent walking on eggshells around Jenny. She was quiet, withdrawn, the usual sparkle in her eyes dulled by a deep, pervasive sadness. I heard her sobbing in the shower once, a gut-wrenching sound that tore through me. She was hormonal, emotional, and Frank's tirade had clearly taken a significant toll on her mental health. This was the absolute last thing she needed, especially in her first trimester. I knew I had to talk to her about Frank, about a restraining order, but the timing felt incredibly delicate. Pushing her too soon could backfire, making her feel even more isolated or defensive of her father, despite his appalling behavior. The trauma bond between a child and a toxic parent, even an adult child, can be incredibly complex and difficult to sever. I wanted to get a couple of things straight, for anyone wondering about our dynamic. Jenny and I don't subscribe to traditional gender roles. It's not something we even consciously discuss, it's just how we operate. Some days I handle more household chores, some days she does. We have a wonderful housekeeper, Maria, who does most of the heavy cleaning and dishes. But we cook for ourselves and do our own laundry. We divide those tasks equally. If I'm exhausted after a long day at the vet clinic, Jenny steps up, and I do the same for her when her HR manager role demands late nights. Yesterday, the disastrous Sunday lunch, Jenny wanted to cook. It was her way of making the intended pregnancy announcement special. I helped her, of course, chopping vegetables, setting the table. Frank, in his blind hatred for me and his outdated worldview, is incapable of seeing this reality. He projects his own archaic beliefs onto us. His comments about my parents were also off base. My mother, a highly intelligent former high school math teacher, chose to quit her job to raise me. It was her decision, born of love, not coercion. Frank's inability to comprehend a relationship built on mutual respect and individual choice is his failing, not ours. And his assumption that we treat Maria, our housekeeper, with anything less than the utmost respect is just another example of his prejudice. We believe everyone deserves dignity, a concept Frank seems to find utterly alien. I would hate for our baby to grow up with such a negative judgmental influence in their life. The thought of Frank spewing his venom around my child, undermining Jenny, criticizing our life choices, it was unthinkable. A restraining order felt like the only viable solution to keep him definitively away. Almost 3 days after that catastrophic lunch, Jenny finally started to emerge from her shell. She'd skipped work for 2 days, staying home, mostly in bed, too upset to focus. I'd encouraged it, knowing she needed time to process. That evening she came back from work a little early, and though still subdued, she seemed a fraction brighter. I decided to broach the subject. We were sitting on the porch swing watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance over our small Charleston garden. "Jen," I began, my voice gentle, "we need to talk about your dad." She tensed but nodded. I just blurted it out, no finesse. "I think we need to get a restraining order against him." I braced myself for her to be against the idea, to defend him, to argue. Instead, she surprised me. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a weary sadness, and said, "I know, Michael. I've been thinking the same thing." Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. She explained that his behavior, especially his threats against me and my father, had deeply frightened and disheartened her. She apologized again, profusely, for inviting him without consulting me, acknowledging that her hope for a reconciliation had been naive and had directly led to this mess. The shared responsibility, her willingness to acknowledge her part, was a crucial step. We decided to speak to a friend of ours, David Liu, who was a family law attorney. If Frank tried to contact us again within the week, we'd take it as a sign to proceed immediately. Even if he didn't, we agreed we couldn't live with the threat of his unpredictable behavior hanging over us, especially with the baby on the way. We had to announce the pregnancy publicly eventually, and if he found out, he was almost certain to show up, causing more chaos. We spoke to David Liu the next day. He listened patiently, his expression growing grimmer as we recounted Frank's tirade and his threats. He agreed a restraining order was a sensible, proactive step. As if on cue, that very morning, Jenny received a long, rambling email from Frank. It was a masterpiece of narcissistic manipulation and gaslighting. He expressed his deep disappointment in her life choices, accused me again of mistreating her, as if we were living in the 50s, he wrote. A phrase that particularly incensed me given our equitable partnership, and even invoked Jenny's deceased mother, saying how sad she would be to see Jenny not even trying to live up to the standards she set. It was disgusting, a deliberate, cruel attempt to exploit Jenny's grief and her love for her mother. He clearly knew her soft spots and was targeting them ruthlessly to get what he wanted, control. That email was the final straw. I was furious. I told Jenny, quite bluntly, that delaying the legal process was no longer an option in my mind. She looked upset by my vehemence, but she agreed. We would file the petition the next day. She'd initially thought we could wait a few days, see if her dad did anything else, but I wasn't willing to gamble with our peace of mind any longer. I was regretting ever letting him back into our lives, even for that one disastrous lunch. I'd been a fool to believe he was capable of change. If someone can't see who you are after 10 years, they'll never see reality. Frank didn't want to know me. He wanted to cling to his preconceived notions, his prejudices. And in doing so, he was undermining his own daughter's ability to make sound adult decisions. He thought he was being progressive by simply believing women should be able to work, But true progressiveness means respecting their autonomy, their choices, especially when they differ from your own. He needed to realize Jenny was a grown woman, capable of choosing her own life, her own husband, without his rescue. The next day, we officially filed for a restraining order against Frank. We had to be present in court in a few days. He would be served within 3 days. Jenny, her hand shaking but her voice firm, texted Frank, informing him of our decision. She told him that while she appreciated everything he'd done for her in the past, his recent behavior towards me, his threats against my family, were unacceptable and something neither of us could take lightly. She was severing all ties with him, once and for all. It was incredibly hard for her, I know, but she did it. And I couldn't have been prouder of her strength, her commitment to our new family, our boundary formation becoming a shield. He didn't reply to her text, and I didn't expect him to. I felt a strange sort of pity for him then. He had no one else in Charleston but Jenny. And now, because of his own stubbornness, his own consuming hatred for me that clearly outweighed his love for his daughter, he had lost even her. There's nothing sadder than that. With the legal process in motion, a weight lifted from our shoulders. We started tentatively looking at bigger houses, something with a nursery, a yard for a future puppy. Jenny's raise at work made it a good time to consider a move, especially since she was still in her first trimester. That evening, we took my parents out to a celebratory dinner at Fig, one of our favorite spots downtown. We finally told them about the pregnancy. They were, as expected, over the moon. We had celebratory ice cream sundaes instead of champagne, out of respect for Jenny. It was a good day, a hopeful day. Life settled into a new rhythm. The restraining order against Frank was granted without contest. He never showed up for the hearing. It turned out to be almost entirely unnecessary in a practical sense. A couple of weeks after we filed, we heard from one of his old neighbors in West Ashley that Frank had sold his house and moved back to Alaska, where Jenny had lived with him and her mom before they relocated to Charleston. He was going to live with his estranged brother. It was sad, in a way, knowing he'd brought this isolation upon himself. But there was nothing we could do. His choices were his own. In much, much better news, 6 months later, our beautiful baby girl, Lily Rose, was born. Holding her in my arms for the first time, seeing Jenny gaze at her with such fierce, tender love, I felt a sense of disbelief, of overwhelming joy. I was a dad. The young woman I'd met in high school, the one I'd bonded with over our mutual, and entirely justified, hatred for our perpetually unprepared French teacher, Madame Dubois, was not only my wife but the mother of my daughter. I was, and still am, completely over the moon. Life has a funny way of working out. The chaos Frank brought into our lives, his narcissistic attempts to control and demean, ultimately forced us to strengthen our own bond, to define our boundaries more clearly, and to prioritize the family we were creating. His toxicity inadvertently paved the way for a more peaceful, more focused future for us and for Lily. We learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to protect your family from those who would harm it, even if that means making difficult, painful decisions. Lily will grow up knowing only love, respect, and the unwavering support of her parents, free from the shadow of her grandfather's bitterness. And that, for me, is the greatest victory of all. I'm a dad now, and my world has never been brighter. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks a bunch.